Thank you, everyone, for joining this week's episode of the Thought Fuel podcast. During this week's episode, we have a very special guest, Eduardo Briceño, author of The Performance Paradox. Eduardo, welcome.
Thank you, Nico. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Eduardo, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm originally from Venezuela. I am a public speaker. I give keynotes and workshops for organizations that want to build a culture of learning and high performance. So organizations that are interested in innovation, agility, culture of experimentation, feedback. I help them do that through the work that I do.
Excellent. And you coined the term performance paradox. What is that exactly?
Performance paradox is a counterintuitive reality that if we're constantly performing, our performance suffers. And it turns out to be what a lot of us are doing in at least some ways in our work and life. And certainly I'm stuck in some ways. I was very much stuck with it before I had this learning. But to explain it, let me kind of explain the difference between performance and learning. If you think about an athlete, right? When an athlete is playing an important match, they are trying to do things as best as they know how, trying to minimize mistakes. That's what I call the performance zone. It's when we're focused on trying to minimize mistakes and being as flawless as possible. The goal might be to win, right? To win the match. But then after the match, we might go to our coach and say, Coach, those things that I was trying to avoid during the match, those moves that I wasn't doing because I know that they're weaknesses, I need to work on those things. Or even the moves that are strengths for me, I want to take them to the next level. So I want to try some things that are not working for me yet, right? That I might not go well, so that I can learn, right? So that's what I call the learning zone. It's leaping beyond the known. And often in work and life, we are just worried about getting things done, right? Going through the checklist. So that's performing. And we're not deliberate enough about how we can also improve, so we can improve our skills and increase our performance over time.
Excellent. And how did you come down to this conclusion in your research? What was your background?
Sure. I got into this work 16 years ago when I partnered with Stanford professor Carol Dweck. She coined the term growth mindset, and she's been studying it since the 80s. And we co-founded an organization called Mindset Works. And so her research is about the belief that people can change, that we can change and that others can change, that our abilities can be developed. And that is a necessary but not sufficient condition for us to be motivated and effective learners. So as I was learning about her work, I realized that in all the research that she has done, they always try to foster this belief called a growth mindset, which is, by the way, as opposed to a fixed mindset, which is when we see ourselves as kind of naturals or as inept and unable to change. But anytime they wanted to put somebody into a growth mindset, they also taught them effective learning strategies, because the researchers in this area understand that improvement doesn't just involve effort. It's not just about working hard. There's two different forms of effort to get things done and efforts to improve, and those involve different strategies. And so there's these two different things that go together. It's the belief, but also the know-how. I know how to learn. I know how to change. And it was something that I think wasn't like being highlighted or clear enough to people in this work. So I wrote the book because this was a big insight to me. It was very helpful to me. And then when I started doing workshops with business leaders and others, it was a big insight for them in terms of like informing how they wanted to lead and how they wanted to lead their lives. And so then I decided to share that more broadly. I did a TEDx talk on it, and that went viral. It's been watched over 4 million times. And then the book was a way to go deeper for me to learn, interview over 100 people, dive deeper into the research, and then share what I've learned with others.
Yeah, and I can't say enough good words about the book. In it, there's this one example that you bring up, and I actually remember when the story broke with the New York Times, where, so I'm a big Foo Fighters fan, big Dave Grohl fan, and in it you mentioned the there was a moment in time, and this must have been like during the pandemic. I think it was that year. Nandi Bushell, who was a 10-year-old drummer in the UK, started challenging Dave Grohl online, and Dave Grohl was getting all these messages from random people. Hey, you need to respond back to this girl. She says that she can outdrum you, and they were going back and forth for quite some time. And she was just 10 years old at the time, and the way she so basically Dave Grohl would play like a song on the drums, and then post the video, and then she would do the same song. And she was able to learn the songs in the same day, and she did it by just playing it bit by bit, by trying not just to be in the performance zone, but also be in the learning zone.
Yeah, I actually followed that kind of exchange on Twitter during the pandemic, and it just brought so much joy. We were all
yeah, exactly.
Isolated in our homes, and
Just watching terrible news, right?
yeah, and so it is amazing. She talks about how she improves and how she engages in the learning zone. And so she talks about, well, I take a little piece of what the song is and I practice that slowly, right? And then I go a little bit faster, and then I take another piece and I work on that. We call that deliberate practice. And then eventually I'm able to play the whole song, and I'm able to play it fast. And so those activities, when I used to play the guitar, I thought practice was just playing songs. Like I would just play a song that I knew that I liked, and I would just play it, and then I would play another song, and then I would play another song. That is a performance zone. That's not a strategy to improve. That's a strategy to perform. And so I wasn't getting better. I was a very mediocre guitar player because I wasn't conscious that there's different strategies that I needed to use in order to get better.
Yeah. And, your book, it's not just about, it covers like work life, it covers everyday life. And, I'm a parent of a very young daughter. And, one of the biggest things that I want to be able to teach her is to develop her own, growth mindset, to be able to develop this growth mindset. How can parents do that based on your experience?
Well, first, I think it starts with a foundation of love and care and safety. Whether we're young kids or adults, it's hard for us to take risks if we don't feel safe. So one thing that parents provide is safety, so that then kids can take risks and know that they're going to be okay. But there's a lot of other research on this. Some of the research looked at how parents talk to their kids, and they noticed that when parents talk to their kids saying how smart the kid is or what a natural the kid is, or not just the parents, but the people around the child, right? Then the child starts developing a fixed mindset, because they think that when they do something well, especially quickly and without mistakes, then they get praised for how smart they are. They think that doing things well is a function of being smart, and not skills that you develop. And so then the child starts staying within their comfort zone and doing the things they know how to do well, quickly, without mistakes, and not taking on challenges. And sometimes, like, school might come pretty easily, so they might score very well and very highly in a fixed mindset. But then when things get hard in middle school or high school or college or the workforce, then they say, oh, I must not be good at this. So they give up really easily, and they say, let me go find out what I'm good at, or let me not try hard so that people don't find out that I'm not this smart. So that's one thing to think about, is the language that we use. Another thing to think about is how comfortable we are with risk-taking and with failure. There's research that shows that parents who see failure as debilitating tend to foster a fixed mindset in their kids, as opposed to failure as being a sign of challenge taking, right? And that you're taking risk, you're doing things you don't know how to do, therefore you're not going to do them correctly. And so sometimes you're going to fail, and you're going to learn from that failure. And failure being something that is part of going beyond your comfort zone, trying new things, and the process of growth. Along with all of that, I think we need to wrestle with our own view of ourselves? Do we see ourselves as a lifelong learner that is continuing to grow and evolve over time? And am I visibly and explicitly modeling that for my kids? Like when I come from work and we are at the dinner table, am I sharing with my kids, hey, here's something that I'm trying to improve. Here's how I'm going about it. I solicited feedback from this person. This is what I learned. This is what I'm thinking about, what I'm trying differently. So are we modeling the process of learning in front of our kids?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And you touched upon something about our relationship with failure, and you have this great example in the book, and it would be remiss if we didn't mention it, with the Engineers Without Borders, where they actually learn to embrace failure, and they even created a website that was just dedicated to all their engineering failures. How can we create a better relationship with the idea of failure so we can learn from it?
Yeah, I think what sometimes people talk about kind of celebrating failure. That doesn't quite resonate with me. I think that the goal is not failure. The goal is challenge taking and learning and improvement, right? And so when we make an experiment, we're going to learn whether it worked or whether it failed. And so we need to be clear so for example, in the workplace, we need to set the stage, meaning what do we want to do together on a daily basis? What behaviors do we want to engage with each other? What systems are we going to use? And so, for example, is experimentation part of that? Are we going to be ideating ways to work differently and how to test different things, because we can't improve without change? So is that going to be a regular conversation that we're going to be thinking about? And what could we try differently now? And then when that happens, when we experiment, are we then thinking about, is that working better or worse? And so if it's worse, if it's failure, how are we learning from that failure? And how are we going to make smarter experiments in the future? And so making it the default and a habit and a system, like, so that we are proactively growing rather than seeing failure as something that it might never happen, but if it happens, then we'll learn from it. That's a kind of very reactive way to see failure, versus we're going to proactively try new things, and that's going to come with failure, and we're going to learn from it.
Excellent. And that's just a complete mindset shift, right? Just shifting how you view something as something like failure, and just accepting that it's part of the experimentation process. It's part of the journey. What else?
Yeah, and I would say, sorry, Nicos, but to add to your previous question, to what you just said, it's like, so that requires a mindset shift. Right? So it requires a rewiring of our brain. So if we are afraid of failure right now, and that's how my brain is wired, how do I change that, right? And so one very simple way to do that is to have a morning habit where every morning we remind ourselves of what is it that we are seeking to change in ourselves. So if it's our view of failure, for example, then I can remind myself every morning of, failure. I want to seek failure through challenge. Like, I can remind myself of that. And so if I'm activating that network of neurons in my brain every day, then I'm gradually going to be rewiring the brain. Especially if I do it not just by reading that statement, but generating that statement. So putting a cue like, how do I want to view failure? And then I come up from within my mind, I think about, I want to seek failure through experimentation. And then I might reveal that and see if I got it right or not. So over time, I'm going to start getting that right more and more often. And then my brain is eventually going to come up with that thought really easily, so that in the middle of the day, at any time, that's how my brain is going to be thinking.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, talking about the science behind a mindset shift and how you are capable, and no one's born with a fixed mindset. Quite to the contrary, neuroplasticity allows you to constantly grow until the end of you, right? So okay. I guess what else can teams do to kind of learn through doing, through not just working hard, but also learning? How can they embed the performance zone in the learning zone and vice versa?
Yeah, so you bring up something which is that athletes can differentiate the performance zone during the match with the learning zone after the match, right? And any of us can do that. Like if I'm listening to this podcast, the listeners right now might be in their learning zone where they're learning about something new that they hadn't thought about before. But there's a huge opportunity in doing the learning zone and the performance zone together at the same time. That's what I call learning while doing, because so many of us spend so much time doing things like working or doing other things that if we shift the way we do things, then we can learn and get things done at the same time. That involves having the goal not just of getting things done, but having two goals, right? Getting things done and improvement. So that means we need to be changing things on a regular basis. If we are always doing every day what we do in the same way, we're not going to be improving. That means kind of asking more questions, whether it's to our colleagues or to the people that we're serving. That means experimenting, that means reflecting. And so a couple of things that teams can do first is set the stage. So, share some of this information with your colleagues and say, hey, like, here's something that made me reflect. And whether it's a video or this podcast or an article, and I'm thinking about this learning zone and performance zone, and I'm kind of interested in exploring whether this is something we're interested in having more of, right? This learning zone, so that we can improve our performance zone. By the way, it also has other benefits like deeper relationships. Things are more interesting. We're discovering more. So having the conversation is this something we're interested in? And then what would that entail? What would we need from each other? Often people feel that they have fear that if they don't portray themselves as knowers, as know-it-alls, as flawless, then other people will think less of them. And so we need to have conversations about how can we create this safety for each other to be vulnerable, to share what I'm looking to improve, to solicit your feedback, to talk about my mistakes. So those conversations of setting the stage are important. Second, thinking about what systems and habits will we use, not just to perform, but also to learn. So for example, if we have a weekly meeting, what do we talk about in that meeting? Often it's just performance items, which are important, but is there a section of that meeting that is about the learning zone, that is about asking questions to each other or sharing what we've learned recently? And then, or like, how do we solicit feedback? When do we solicit feedback? Who do we solicit feedback from? And then finally, for any person, is reflecting on, are we modeling learning visibly and explicitly? Just like with our kids, are we sharing with our colleagues what we're looking to improve and how they can support us? I'm looking to improve in this area, so I would love your feedback along the way if you have any ideas or about things that I did that worked well or things that I could change. And as I'm going through that process, just having conversations about our improvement as individuals.
Yeah, and you talk about feedback and how important it is, and just from my experience and 15 years just doing being an HR executive and working with people on how to better improve, feedback is always a struggle. It's a struggle to ask for feedback, make time for feedback, ingrain that into your work life, and also ensure that it's ongoing and recurring and not a one and done thing at the end of the year. So, is it the responsibility of the organization, or is it also part of the responsibility of the team members to make sure that they have time to set up for feedback specifically?
Feedback is super powerful. I think it's the most powerful learning zone strategy in the workplace. And I think the greatest opportunities for any of us to solicit feedback frequently and broadly. Because when we solicit feedback, we make it really easy for the other person to give it. Otherwise, they might be scared that we might react defensively or that we might not want the feedback, as most people are scared of it. So if we solicit it, we make it a lot easier. We can also make it easier for other people by just asking for something specific that doesn't take a lot of time. It can be after a meeting. You can talk about, hey, I was trying to be concise in that meeting. Was I able to do that? Do you have any ideas on what I did well or what I didn't do well? It can be like a 30-second conversation. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. And so that way we're making it easy for other people, and the feedback is very specific to what we're most interested in. And it is also, every time we solicit feedback, we're doing it at a time where we're ready to listen to it, and we are training ourselves to remember feedback is something that is super useful to me to continue to improve, right? And feedback is always useful. Like if I ask for your opinion about something, I might agree with it or I might disagree with it, but it's always useful to know what you're thinking and how I'm coming across, right? So the gift that you're giving me by sharing your thinking with me is something that's always useful to me, as the information. And so the more we do it, the more we solicit it, the more we change our thinking. And then if we've had these explicit conversations with our colleagues that we want to solicit feedback from each other, then we are reinforcing that behavior, and we're making it easier for other people to solicit feedback as well, so that then we are all learning together.
Yeah, and you said you have to be ready to listen to that feedback, and it's always good to pick the most appropriate time for the other person to give you feedback. And typically it never is months and months after a project or an assignment has been completed, but something while you're actually collaborating, just so you can improve on the feedback. And if you don't agree with the feedback, at least you know that you get a better sense of reading the room and understanding how you're being viewed by other people. With that, if you do get feedback that you don't agree, how do you agree with? How can people learn from that? And maybe it might be feedback that they don't want to hear, or maybe it might be feedback that really questions their why, questions maybe their values. How do you overcome that?
Well, I think you can agree or disagree with the feedback, but you're always learning from it. Like I'm learning how you're thinking and how I'm coming across. So I think we can first thank the person for giving us the information that, because it's not always comfortable for people to share that information with us. So thank you so much. Ideally, we want to stay curious and ask follow-up questions. Like if I disagree with something you said, it should make me curious, ideally, and I should make follow-up questions to think about, is there something here that I might be missing, right? Or where's Nicos coming from? And maybe there are questions that I can ask to help me think about how you are thinking, right? And maybe that might shed light into something that might be useful for me. But even just knowing how you're thinking would be useful to me, right? And then if I'm soliciting feedback from other people other than you, and they're saying the same thing that you're saying, then that's going to make me more skeptical of my view that I disagree with it, right? There's a consistency here where several people are saying something that I disagree with, but I'm hearing it several times. So what's going on? So some people who have been in that situation have then started working with a coach and say, if they have that privilege, and they went to the coach and said, hey, here's something that I'm hearing from these people. I feel like they're just out to get me, but I'm curious, might they be onto something? And is there something here that I'm missing? And so in working through the coach, they got through a big realization of some of the dynamics and some of the things that this person could do better that was creating problems. So soliciting feedback from different people is definitely one way to get more information so that we can make more informed choices and staying curious.
Yeah, and your life's work, you've studied successful business people, entrepreneurs. You have a background in, from what I read, investment banking, venture capital. You've studied athletes, celebrities. What is the common thread to all these success stories that you've read and seen?
Well, I think there are, in addition to a growth mindset, the belief that we can evolve and change over time, and understanding what what strategies that and habits that involves, people also tend to have a strong why, a sense of purpose. Like, why do I care about this thing that I'm going to put effort into both the learning zone and the performance zone to go in this journey and go through the discomfort that it takes to have honest conversations or to solicit feedback or to experiment and fail. So a sense of purpose is really important. And then the other thing that is a great magnifier is the community, the people around us. If we are in a team where everybody wants to improve and is soliciting feedback all the time, then that makes it a lot easier for us to behave in that same way and to solicit feedback and experiment too. And so we'll grow a lot more, right? Or if we're in a school where the people who are curious and exploring are well regarded and respected, that's gonna motivate us to do that, versus in a school where those people are kind of ostracized and thought of as as uncool and low status. So the people around us matter a lot, and we can think about who we're surrounding ourselves with, but also how are we building culture with them? How are we being deliberate about what kind of culture we want to have and what that entails in terms of conversations and collaborative habits?
Yeah, absolutely. And you are the product of your surroundings, whether you like it or not. So if you're surrounded by high-performing people that are open to improving and have a strong why, then likely that will rub off on you and you will rub off on them. Outside of writing The Performance Paradox and doing all this research, I know that you've been a consultant. Can you give us an example of something of a project that you were very, very proud of, or something that you feel that allowed you to leverage all this knowledge and research and see it come into action?
Absolutely. I'm very proud and love working with organizations that are genuinely and authentically working to improve, and they also tend to be organizations that have a sense of purpose, so that they feel their work matters and is making other people's lives better. So whether that is, for example, with Clear Choice Dental, right, where I first came to speak at one of their offsites for their leaders, and I've spoken at several events there, and we've kind of collaborated to think about what habits and systems they have in place, and the thing that struck me the most when I started working there was they do dental implants, and I thought that dental implants were just aesthetic, just people who wanted to look better, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what I learned is that actually the people who have these dental implants, they tend to have very serious problems with their teeth, and it affects how they can eat, what they can eat, and how nutritiously they can eat, but also importantly, how much they can smile. They tend to not smile. They tend to keep their mouth closed. And that has huge implications over our emotions, over our health, over our relationships with other people. And so they were so connected about the importance of the work they were doing. And that drove them to really be interested in how to improve. And so in partnership with them, they're driving this, but they have grown so much. They have over 50% market share in the core market that they serve. They, for 17 years after their inception, one of their salespeople achieved $1 million in sales, and so they created what they called a $1 million club, and they celebrated that with a recognition. And then 12 months later, they have seven other people who had built the $1 million club. And then they had like an event to interview these 8 people and ask them questions. And one of the questions that came up was like, when you have a bad day, or a bad week, what do you do? And all of them, what they do when they're having a bad day is they go back to the learning zone. In their case, one of the things they do is they record interactions with actual patients with patient consent. And they go back to those videos to analyze themselves and to think about what they can improve. And so that's something that I see across industries, across companies, is for the high performers, not only do they habituate the learning zone, but when they're struggling, what they do is they go back to the learning zone. So whether it's Clear Choice Dental, New York Life, Siemens, just long-term partnerships with companies that really care about this and do it genuinely, that's super fulfilling to me.
Yeah. And it sounds like they cultivated a very strong why. What advice do you have for either teams or individuals out there to kind of work on their own why? What can they do? What are a couple of things that they could do to make sure that they're strong in their convictions as to why they're doing something?
Sure. So for individuals, when we can think about, instead of finding our purpose, is to develop our purpose. So finding our purpose would be more a fixed mindset view that our purpose exists inside of us and we have to figure out what it is, versus we have to build our purpose. So that's one way to think about it that is more effective. And also, before we have a strong sense of purpose, it's helpful to explore our interest and to tinker and to play. So we don't have to think, oh, if I don't feel a strong sense of purpose, I'm doomed. No, we have to explore and think about our interest and try new things, and whatever it is that we're doing, think about what impact that has on other people. So maybe spending time with those people that you're serving, asking them why this matters to them, so that you're reframing the work that you do, rather than you just go to work and you do something to get a paycheck. What is your role in what your organization does, and what impact does that have on other people? And that has huge ramifications. Like people who clean hotel rooms, for example, those who feel that they're just doing a job, they have less kind of cardiovascular health than those who believe that that's helpful exercise. And those who feel like, oh, I'm just taking care of people while they're away from home, they feel a sense of purpose that is really fulfilling for them, and that gives them a big why. And so whatever the work that we do, we can think about what's the effect on other people, and how can I reframe this in terms of making it meaningful to me.
Yeah, that's actually very insightful. So, Eduardo, what's a book recommendation that you can recommend to our readers, maybe that might be, outside of your own book, that might be helpful for them, that we discussed today, or that inspired you in your journey?
Well, the book Mindset by Carol Dweck has been life-changing for me. That's about growth mindset. I'm currently reading a book that I love. It's called Love 2.0. And it is about the emotion love, not a romantic emotion, and not even an emotion that we can only feel with loved ones, like with our family, or even with people that we know. It's something that we can feel with strangers every day, and how important this emotion is, and what we can do to foster it more and to feel it more. So that's one that I'm loving reading right now. Another one that comes to mind that I think everybody should read, in my opinion, is Breaking the Age Code by Becca Levy. It's about ageism. We live in an ageist society, so this shows what impact that has on all of us, and how to consider thinking differently about aging, how that can benefit us and others.
Wow. Yeah, those both sound like amazing book recommendations. Well, Eduardo, thank you for joining us today. Where can the audience find you if they want to seek you out?
Sure. So if people want to learn more about the learning zone and the performance zone, my book is The Performance Paradox. It's available wherever books are sold. I am active on LinkedIn. That's the place where I'm most active. People can connect with me there. And I have a monthly newsletter on my website, briceño.com. And there's some free resources there, like 5 tips to foster a growth mindset. That's my last name, BRICENO.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Eduardo. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode of the Thought Fuel podcast. See you next week.